Good evening. Welcome to the February 20th meeting of the Ann Arbor City Council. If you're able, please rise and join us for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Will the clerk please call the roll of council?
Councilmember Apathy?
Here.
Councilmember Banister?
Here.
Councilmember Westfall?
Here.
Councilmember Lum?
Here.
Councilmember Grand? Councilmember Ackerman?
Here.
Mayor Taylor?
Here.
Councilmember Eaton?
Here.
Councilmember Crapo?
Here.
Councilmember Warpahowski?
Here.
Councilmember Smith? Present. We have a quorum.
Can I ask members of the audience with signs to please bring them down below head level because they're blocking people behind them. Thank you very much. May I have a motion, please, to approve the agenda? Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, seconded by Councilmember Lum. Discussion of the agenda. It's been represented to me that DC 3 and DC 4 are of the sort of resolutions which would ordinarily be in the consent agenda. I'd like to, with council's acquiescence, pile those into the consent agenda as well. DC 3, DC 4. All in favor of the agenda as altered?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The agenda is approved. Are there communications today from our city administrator?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. There are some items attached to the agenda which I just want to call your attention to, primarily the first memorandum which responds to council's request for information about improvements in and around Huron High School. Also, generally like to thank our police support, but I don't have your name, so I apologize. There we go. Thank you very much. And with that, Mayor, I'm going to give the rest of the time that you would generously give to me and let our city attorney make an announcement.
Mayor and Council, I'd like to call up my colleague Mary Fales to the podium. And I'll have her stand on my right side because she's been a right-hand person for me for a long time. Mary Fales is retiring next week after over 21 years of service to the city as the senior assistant city attorney. You all know she has provided legal help to the financial services area, but her portfolio is and always was much broader than that. Tonight it's fitting that there are, I think, 3 Greenbelt matters, for example, on the agenda. Mary Fales was the legal architect for the city's Greenbelt program, setting the framework of the dreams of prior council members and mayor and reflecting the interests of this community. She's advised Parks and Land Acquisition Commission. She's advised on elections. She's advised on millages, environmental, brownfield, emergency management, liquor committee, and many other things. Many of the 3 mayors and the 45 council members over the past 21 years have spent time in Mary's office, and I know this in part because she's right next to me, and I've seen them in there, until their resolution or charter amendment or ordinance or whatever advice was done, no matter what time that was. On March 1st, next week, Thursday at 2 o'clock in this council chambers, we will have a celebration for folks, and that's not the purpose of this. You've already been invited to that. But tonight, the city administrator was kind enough to let me bring her up here and thank her publicly to Mary Joan Fales, who has been a dedicated public servant who's worked steadfastly and applied her wide-ranging legal expertise for the betterment of the city of Ann Arbor. All I can say is thank you.
It's been a distinct honor to represent the city for this period of time, and I hope that that your good work continues for many years to come with new members in my office.
Mr. Lazarus, you still have the floor.
Thank you. I would just like to add one more item. I just sent an email to council. Chief Baird let his staff know earlier today that he's going to be retiring within the next very short time frame. And I will leave it up to him to share, as he deems appropriate, what life's next great adventure is. But we will be planning for an orderly turnover and transition. And we all wish Chief well as he chases what lies around the curve and the trail.
Thank you. We have no introductions today, but we do have public commentary reserve time. We now come to public comment reserve time, which is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment reserve time, one needs to have signed up in advance by communicating with the city clerk. Speakers will have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Our first speaker today is Blaine Coleman.
For 16 bloody years, the Ann Arbor City Council has blocked every attempt to have a public hearing on the resolution to boycott Israel. The resolution to boycott Israel to the maximum extent allowed by law. During those 16 years, Israel has murdered thousands of Palestinians. During those 16 years, Israel has murdered this girl's uncle. Her name is Ahed Tamimi. Ahed Tamimi. Israel has also murdered this girl's cousin. Israel has shot this girl's other cousin, who just came out of his coma. Israel has shot this girl's mother. Israel has jailed this girl's father and mother, and now Israel has jailed the girl herself, Tamimi, in jail, kidnapped from her own Palestinian home on Palestinian land by invading Israeli soldiers. And for 16 bloody years, this city council, right here in front of you, has blocked every effort to even have a public hearing on the resolution to boycott Israel. What can you say about a racist, violent state like Israel that murders with abandon so many thousands of Palestinians? And what can you say about a city council that seems bent on protecting Israel almost at all costs? Why? Why? And the only thing I can say is boycott Israel and goddamn Israel. Boycott Israel and goddamn Israel. I really don't know what else to say until this city council comes to its senses, holds a public hearing on the resolution to boycott Israel. Again, for those 16 years that the council has protected Israel, for those 16 years Israel has been protected by this city council while murdering so many Palestinians, I say boycott Israel and goddamn Israel. Boycott Israel and goddamn Israel. I really can't say it enough. And this girl is still in jail, in an Israeli jail that has no right to hold her. And I still say, until every Palestinian is free,
boycott these killers. Don't help them.
Our next speaker today is Sally Daniels.
Friends of Ann Arbor Wildlife and Nature would like the citizens of Ann Arbor to know the city has been very disappointing regarding the lack of transparency with the deer management program this year. Just as citizens are calling for more transparency with our police, we are calling on the city to add transparency to their measures of a successful deer management program. We have a right to know where our tax dollars are being spent. We have a right to know where firearms are being dislodged in our neighborhoods. We have a right to expect our tax dollars are being spent wisely, and not for so-called pest eradication projects for a few who live near the woods. When you aren't forthcoming with simple information about where shooting is occurring in these neighborhoods, it is completely unacceptable. The city said they would notify in advance abutting property owners of shootings scheduled to take place next door to them. Did the city notify these neighbors? Because we have heard of no such notification letters. And if so, how many neighbors refused to give their consent to using firearms next door to them? We noticed there is no oversight. The vendor quotes the city when asked about numbers of deer to be killed, deer to be sterilized, and the city quotes the vendor and says the city follows the vendor's recommendations. And sometimes the city has gone so far as to say something has been under the purview of MDNR when the MDNR has said it is not under their control whatsoever. We continue to be very concerned about public safety and the enormous scope of this killing operation. The city agreed, thankfully, to use security guard cars around the killing sites as a protection measure. We noticed after week 2, there were no security cars anywhere in Ann Arbor for the 3rd and 4th weeks. Why were security cars suddenly removed? And what was their purpose if they were only present for 2 of the 4 weeks? We are asking for a transparent process informing the citizens where and when they can shoot guns in our neighborhoods. So far, there's nothing clear about what the city is doing, and they certainly do not know what impact killing and gun violence is having on our community. We, the citizens of Ann Arbor, urge you to make Ann Arbor a sanctuary city for nonviolence and transparency. It comes from the top down, and this means that when we FOIA a council person, we receive. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker today is Donna Fischer.
In follow-up to gun violence problem, I'm asking council to consider drafting a resolution pertaining to the public health impact of gun violence in Ann Arbor schools. And I've taken the liberty of writing a first draft of that resolution for you if you need it. And I won't read that now, but I'll just start by telling you my name is Donna Fischer. I'm a retired AFT librarian and educator and an artist. I'm relatively new to Ann Arbor, having moved here from Pittsburgh in 2016 to walk my Sicilian mother-in-law, Mary, to the end of her life. I miss my mother-in-law, but I'm grateful she died before witnessing the GOP assault on teachers and the NRA hijack of our Congress to bully and intimidate them into inaction on the most pressing health and social security issue of our time. My wife is a University of Michigan alum, a nursing educator, a health psychologist. She couldn't be here tonight, but she wanted me to tell you that gun violence is in fact a pressing public health concern, and wants you to know that a large part of that problem is because GOP pretty much gutted community mental health coverage, and by the time someone picks up a loaded gun and goes into a school to kill indiscriminately, it's too late. My mother-in-law would have been incensed right now to see what has become of her country in less than a year and a half following her death. She'd be grieved to know more children and teachers have been executed by a madman with a Kalashnikov, which I might add is now manufactured in Florida, and she'd spend hours saying her rosary, worried sick that her daughter and son-in-law, both Ann Arbor teachers, and their grandsons are just likely to be executed at school as to teach and learn the math you need to know to build an escalator to the moon or to become a fiscally responsible president or CEO. University of Michigan and City of Ann Arbor, that it helped flourish our leaders and the best in social relevance and justice, the pursuit and promotion of knowledge, innovation, and peace. Gun violence is antithetic to leaders in the best, but is solvable with the will to solve it. Having spent 41 years prior in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, I learned to be a helper running into danger when everyone else is running away. I'm here today to invite you all to join me to solve our problem with gun violence by passing a resolution that states emphatically that we are in agreement and intend to fight the scourge of gun violence in every way we can. Never again will we permit a madman to enter our schools, gun down our students, not now, not ever, not in our school district, not in our town. We are leaders in the best, and we invite everybody with gun to surrender their weapon, rejoin our human family, and take this pledge. I pledge allegiance to planet Earth, to the humanity for which it stands, one landmass, under sun, moon, and stars, with liberty, peace, equality, justice for all. Your safety and security matter. That's an all right place to end.
Thank you. Are there communications today from council? Councilmember Lund.
If I may, would just like to add my thanks for, she's left, but city attorney posted it, indicate maybe she hasn't, but for Mary Fales, City Attorney Fales, sorry, thank you for coming back or for not leaving. 21 years of service. Your service to us all, this community, has been exceptional. And I have had the honor and pleasure of interacting with you on innumerable occasions, going back, 21 years ago. And without fail, you have been the one person who would be, constantly available to provide guidance and your expert advice without regard to, personal demands. You have commuted to and from Monroe over all these years, and there were many evenings where, there were driving advisories because of snowstorms or whatever, the inclement weather, but there you were, at your desk, attending to the work at hand, even if it required your staying late, finding a room in Ann Arbor because you couldn't get home, but you stayed because the work may have demanded it. It certainly didn't insist that you, stand your post, but you always did, without fail. And I know that to replace you, your work has been now divided amongst a couple of city attorneys, which also obviously speaks to the volume of work that you did and did so expertly. And I personally have, you've been there. The city attorney Postema mentioned, that, the various areas that you've advised on over the years. And personally, I've benefited greatly by all of your wise counsel and guidance on elections, millages. I've spent a lot of hours in your office discussing liquor license issues as the chair of that committee for a number of years now. You have, for me, it was always uncomfortable to be appointed the judge of these hearings when liquor licenses are reviewed. It's a very serious matter, and you always gave me my script and provided, the most exquisite and helpful guidance, and always made it doable. And so I know many of us will, I kind of rubbed my eyes when you were standing at the podium. You will be greatly missed by us all, and I wish for you the very best, and thank you. I can't thank you adequately, but please know your service to this community has been exceptional without question, and I just want to thank you, give you heartfelt thanks for all of your outstanding service, and you will be missed greatly. So thank you so very much.
Further communication from council. Councilmember Banister.
I just had 3 quick announcements. I would also like to thank Mary as part of my new council orientation. She spent hours with me explaining green belt and different things, so thank you, Mary, and best wishes in retirement. Zach, did you and I want to, was this the time we were going to say a couple words about the last? Okay, at the February 9th Housing and Human Services Advisory Board meeting, which both Zach and I are, Councilmember Zach Ackerman and I are on, we had Jenny Hall from the Housing Commission there, and we will be forwarding to council our resolution about how we're proposing the mental health millage money be spent in fiscal year 2019. And that's an 8-year millage, and we're expecting roughly $1 million coming from the 40% designated for affordable housing. And of that money, we were recommending to council 25% pass through to supportive services, with a handful of 7 or so nonprofits in town who provide supportive services at the sites of the Housing Commission. And then the other 75% of the $1 million would go to the Affordable Housing Fund, which used to be called the Trust Fund, but evidently they've recently dropped trust. It's just the Affordable Housing Fund. So I wanted to, Mr. Ackerman and I had suggested we would announce that here, so I will let him add on to anything. And then just one last thing, Ward 1 is continuing on Wednesday night. We are opening to the public at Arrowwood Wednesday night tomorrow from 6 to 8 p.m. for the Poor People's Campaign, which is the national call for moral revival, and all wards are welcome to join us starting at 6 o'clock tomorrow at the Arrowwood Clubhouse off Pontiac Trail. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councilmember Banister, for that information. Just to take a step back for the public's information and for our colleagues' information, the Housing Commission is going to go through a tough spot. While after the RAD conversion and the rehabilitation of our affordable housing units has been successful, one of the key functions that the Housing Commission provides is distributing Section 8 vouchers. Over the course of the next months, we will better understand what Congress intends to do with our Section 8 program, but it's looking like cuts at least 10%. Which translates to a very real effect on our Housing Commission and our ability to provide housing vouchers so people can live in our community who may not otherwise be able to. The result is, in a very fiscally responsible manner, the Housing Commission has looked inward about how to keep their house in order and has decided to focus revenues on ensuring that they can handle their administrative costs. However, like Councilmember Banister said, there are 8 service providers in the community who do tremendous good staffing, after-school programs, and support programs at our various Housing Commission properties. They may be looking to us for some general fund support to continue those services, which are absolutely necessary for the healthy function of our affordable housing system. And like Councilmember Banister said, fortunately, during the Trump administration, we've passed a mental health millage that'll help us carry our efforts forward. And the Housing and Human Services Advisory Board will be forwarding a resolution expressing some guidance on how to spend that to ensure that the Housing Commission remains afloat during these trying times.
Further communication from council. Councilmember Lum for reprise.
Yeah, no, not a reprise. This is another topic. This has to do with the medical marijuana facility permitting process, and I would just like to note that Councilmember Westfall and I have been receiving some feedback from some Second Ward residents because it came to their attention because they received a postcard inviting them to a citizen participation meeting. Turns out it was sent inadvertently because this applicant is applying for special exception use to locate as a tenant in an existing property on Plymouth Road. It's in a strip mall on Plymouth Road. So there will not be a citizen participation meeting. Nevertheless, residents have clearly have an interest in providing feedback, input, comment on the siting of this facility. And then a gentleman who happens to be president of a nearby neighborhood association, homeowners association, did look up the permits and noticed that there's a plethora of permits. I think there's 11 in process now, and I know that the Planning Commission will be reviewing 2 tomorrow night, and the staff recommendation is for approval. This procedure where, you know, as we know, to grant special exception use, that's done by upon the recommendation of staff by the Planning Commission and does not come forward to council. But there seems to be a need for a formal process or formal way for citizens to provide their input and for that to be reflected. So I will not have anything ready for the next meeting, but I have expressed an interest to these residents in response to bring forward, to look at our ordinance, to see how we can make a correction in the special exception use process for recommendations such as this, so that there is a requirement for example, a citizen participation meeting so that formalized input can be provided. And so that's just a bit of a heads up. I really did not appreciate that there was this hole in the process for engaging the citizens, providing that input formally until this one, application came forward, and we've subsequently gotten this feedback. So, so just a heads up, if you will.
Thank you. Further communication from council. I'd like to recommend the following nominations for your consideration to the Ann Arbor Housing Commission: Thierry Batalonga, and then a resolution also for consideration at our next meeting to appoint Mohammed Al-Azem to the Human Rights Commission. We now come to the consent agenda. May I have a motion, please, to approve the consent agenda? Moved by Councilmember Smith, seconded by Councilmember Crapple. Discussion of the consent agenda, which includes DC 3 and DC 4. Councilmember Lum.
Thank you again. No need to pull these out. A comment on CA 15. I'd just like to thank you, Mr. Mayor. This item, CA 15, relates to the Nixon Corridor Improvements Project. Staff has concluded it makes sense to do the design for the water and storm improvements at the same time as the design for the traffic improvements. And CA 15 is to appropriate funding from the water and stormwater system funds for their design piece. As we all know, we promised the Nixon area neighbors we'd make these traffic improvements, which includes a series of roundabouts along Nixon at key intersections, and I am encouraged whenever I see something on the agenda like this one that moves the project forward. So while I recognize this won't happen overnight, we do need to honor our commitment as expeditiously as we can, and I guess, as you know, I'll be checking back periodically for updates, but I want to thank you and acknowledge this. And I have just on the bargaining agreement, if like someone else wants to chime in first. So DC 3 and 4 that are now on the consent agenda. These two collective bargaining agreements on the agenda, I will be supporting both. They reflect pay increases comparable with the increases for other city employees, both union and non-union, and are reflective of inflation. I'm calling these out because I want to note that I am especially pleased to see that the Police Service Specialists Agreement includes the provision that new hires to the unit will receive the city's new hybrid pension plan. This pension plan structural change for new hires is an important one in limiting the city's and taxpayers' long-term financial risk, and the new hires for most bargaining units and non-union new hires are already on the new plan. That includes new hires for ASME, which is the other agreement we're considering tonight. The police officers unit new hires are not on the new plan yet, however, so it is encouraging to see the police service specialists sign on. Again, I'll be supporting both collective bargaining agreements, and my thanks to staff and to the bargaining units for their efforts in reaching a fair and reasonable agreement. Thank you.
Further discussion? I'd like to touch upon at least 2 items in the consent agenda. 3 items, actually. First, I'd like to just acknowledge that we are, we continue to do good work with the Community Action Network in connection with the Bryant and Northside Community Centers. The CAN does incredible work in areas of our community where it is profoundly needed and greatly appreciated, so I wanted to extend my thanks there. Also want to just identify CA 13, which is an appropriation for funds in connection with the North 5th Avenue Reconstruction project. That's going to be a major project that we will be seeing the next construction season, which I think will, be a tremendous improvement to that important area of our town. So I'm glad that that's going to happen. And finally, I just also want to touch upon CA 16, which is a resolution to approve an amendment to the parking agreement between DDA and the city. Among other things, it extends the 20% gross revenue from parking proceeds from the DDA to the city. The DDA is an important, an important partner in providing city services to residents and visitors. DDA does great work downtown. They support and operate our parking system with efficiency and diligence, but at the same time, they also understand that the parking system is a public asset and it is being utilized here for the public good through a number of aspects, but certainly too, with particularity here, the continuing allocation of 20% of parking proceeds to the city's general fund. That is money upon which we rely. It's money with which we provide essential services to the public, and it is, I think the DDA warrants our thanks for it. Further discussion? All in favor of the consent agenda?
Aye.
All opposed? The consent agenda, including DC 3 and DC 4, is approved with 10 council members present, all voting in the affirmative, thus satisfying the 8-vote requirement with respect to CA 1, CA 2, CA 13, CA 15, and that is all. We now come to some public hearings. Public hearings are opportunities for members of the public to speak to council and the community about the specific item on the agenda. To speak at a public hearing, you need not have signed up in advance, but your speech must relate to the specific subject of the public hearing. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Public hearing number 1, an ordinance to amend Chapter 55, zoning of Title 5 of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor to add Section 583, solar energy systems. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? To speak, merely walk on up and say your piece.
Thank you. My name is Sarah Figueroa, and I live at 2815 Brockman Boulevard with my husband and sons. I would first like to thank you for your time in working through the issue regarding front yard solar possibilities with the hope that the community can increase our utilization of solar at a time when we clearly see the benefits of the alternative energy resource. I'm asking the council to consider front yard mounted solar panels in areas where other options are not viable, so as not to limit homeowners should they choose to invest and contribute what they can for the environment. It is unfortunate that so many meetings have been held with the potential end result that this might not be possible due to divisive work rather than coordinated effort and potential compromise towards a larger cause. Ideally, I would also like to request that community solar panel options be at the forefront of city planning and environmental policy for Ann Arbor and our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Ernesto Figueroa. My wife, children, and myself live at 2815 Brockman Boulevard. We're here because we requested and were granted a permit to install solar panels in our front yard in the latter part of 2016. As most of you know, that permit was put on hold by a moratorium, and is what we're arguing now. I would like to let you know that I'm personally deeply committed to the cause of responding to the threat of climate change in a very personal and practical way. We've invested in our home, replaced our fiber insulation by foam insulation. We have upgraded windows. We purchased our electric car, and we hope to get a second one if possible. My 6 miles commute to work is done on bike about 50% of the time, as my time allows. And wherever we can, we try to, we're doing what we can to reduce our carbon footprint. Of course, I understand that this is not only about our front yard, but front yards across the city. But in good conscience, I think that the city should support any effort to promote solar. As I have followed this debate, the only argument that I can understand is that, simply put, several neighbors simply don't like, the aesthetics of solar panels in front yards. It appears that it disrupts the current aesthetic ideal of an almost pristine, open, green front yard. I think that this not need to be the case, as the City Planning Commission recommended. Solar panels can be enclosed and completely invisible from the point of view of a passerby. I feel that the opposition to our project has portrayed an installation as a sort of a monstrosity, and I think that this is a misrepresentation. I think that working with a landscaping architect, you can put aesthetically pleasing solar installation in your front yard. We're simply trying to do what we think is right and according to our conscience. We don't mean harm to anyone. And we believe that this can be carried through without imposing on the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at this public hearing? Seeing no one, this public hearing is closed. Public hearing number 2, an ordinance to amend section 117 of chapter 1, adoption, contents, and interpretation of title 1 of the code of the city of Ann Arbor. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing?
Let me tell them about their footprint. Let me tell them how their footprint is, how they're killing people in
Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
with your dollars, and you're worried about your footprint is correct. But make sure the money you're spending, you're killing people all over the world, including in Palestine. Including in Palestine. You're killing people.
Ma'am, please.
Ma'am, please what?
Please, we're in a public hearing now. Thank you. Public hearing number 2. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? Seeing no one, this public hearing is closed. Public hearing number 3, resolution to approve fiscal year 2018 fee adjustments for parks, recreation services for Argo and Gallup liveries. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? Seeing no one, this public hearing is closed. Public hearing number 4, resolution to approve fiscal year 19 fee adjustments for safety service area fire department service fee schedule. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? Seeing no one, this public hearing is closed. A1, regular session meeting minutes of February 5, 2018. May I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes? Moved by Councilmember Smith, seconded by Councilmember Crapo. Discussion of the minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? They are approved. B1, ordinance to amend Chapter 55, zoning of Title 5 of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor to add Section 583, solar energy systems. Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, seconded by Councilmember Lum. Discussion, please, of B1. Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For those of you who do not recall the conversation a month ago, this was put forward a set of regulations around ground-mounted solar panels in front, side, and rear yards. During the course of the discussion, we amended the language put forward by the Planning Commission to prohibit ground-mounted solar panels in front yards, leaving side yards and rear yards in place. This conversation began almost a year ago when two sets of constituents approached me on two different sides of this debate. And while I see a tremendous amount of merit in both of their arguments, and I believe both come from good places, I will continue to vote in favor of the prohibition in front yards. I believe that accessory structures are a blind spot in our zoning ordinance when it comes to single-family homes. They allow for 21-foot structures to be placed in ways unintended, I believe, when the zoning was written decades ago. I realize that for some, this vote is a relief, and for others, it's a disappointment. For constituents and neighbors who have opened their home to me and given me cookies and iced tea and driven me home while I was stuck in the rain. And that makes it a hard vote. But for the reasons I've stated tonight and the many more reasons I articulated at the last meeting, I'll be voting for this ordinance as written today.
Further discussion? Councilmember Lum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will also be supporting this tonight, but I'd like to speak briefly to the process that brought us to this point. It was critical that we hit the pause button last fall and took the time to gather input from the community on the question of placing ground-mounted solar arrays in residential front yards. That feedback was strong and clear. The large majority of folks were opposed to allowing solar equipment in front yards, even with the restrictions that were proposed. And aside from the meetings that were held, I know I received a lot of email input from Second Ward residents, and it was consistent, and again, strong and clear, that folks were opposed to allowing this in front yards. Residents support solar energy, but for aesthetic and safety reasons, just not in the front yards in their neighborhoods. Fortunately, staff heard the feedback and drafted an alternative version of the ordinance for council to consider that prohibited solar equipment in front yards, and council listened as well. And we very appropriately adopted the alternative prohibiting front yard installations at first reading. As I mentioned at first reading, there's a clear lesson learned here for council, staff, and the Planning Commission. The aesthetics and character of our neighborhoods is something residents care deeply about, and that shouldn't come as a surprise to us. It's a major contributor to our quality of life. So before the city takes any action that could impact neighborhood character, regardless of the motivation, we clearly need to engage the community and ask them what they think. We came very close to adopting an ordinance without proper community input and need to make sure that never happens again. I would not have supported the original version of the ordinance that allowed front yard installations, but now that the ordinance has been revised, I will be supporting it. It's certainly appropriate for us to establish guidelines for this technology, and I think the balance of the ordinance is reasonable. And I also would like to thank Councilmember Ackerman for his lead on this. I don't know how anyone could not want to serve you tea and cookies. You're a good listener, and this ordinance reflects that and the changes. And because this does reflect a consistency with the feedback that we received. So thank you all for listening, and thank you, Councilmember Ackerman, for also wanting to take a look at the larger issue of what we allow, in these front and, side and rear setbacks in our neighborhoods. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think with that, there are some natural next steps that we as a council have to make a priority, and me as a council member will. I think one is in short order trying to figure out a way to approach accessory structures in front yards. I believe it to be one of those small pieces of our zoning code that puts a lot of the character of our neighborhoods at risk. The second is a doubling down on our efforts around climate change. I think when we limit any ability to act on behalf of the environment in a concrete way that speaks to your property, I think it has to be matched with double the resolve to make sure that we can do things as a community off of the properties affected to ensure that we're meeting those residents' goals. Things like continuing to fight interpretations of solar taxation to make it more economically viable for homeowners to put solar panels on their roofs. Things like figuring out a legal structure to support community solar so that people can pool resources and meaningfully build solar panels should their properties not permit it or their pocketbooks not allow it individually. And finally, finding significant dollars to invest in climate action planning, like we will be with our rebate from the mental health millage, in which $900,000 a year will be directed towards climate action planning in tangible and meaningful ways that both speak to individual property owners and to the community at large, as well as business owners. So thank you for all of my constituents who have stuck through this. It's been a long process, but I hope council will support this ordinance as written.
Councilmember Smith.
Being that I expect to be the lone dissenting vote on this particular matter, I'd like to explain how I get to my position. One is that, you know, I view climate change as the most serious existential threat that we face. And I think that, aesthetics versus presenting somebody with no other options the opportunity to create renewable energy is a mistake. I think that ultimately, you know, if it's a choice between, you know, this could force a family like the Figueroas into cutting down trees or looking at another way to configure their property to accommodate renewable energy generation in the form of solar. The unfortunate reality of all of this is that while Consumers Energy this week announced that they were going to cease using all coal-burning power plants in the next 25 years, you know, unfortunately, you know, only 40% of their output will be coming from renewable sources during that period of time, meaning that 60% is still coming from natural gas and nuclear. And unfortunately, we have DTE. We don't have consumers, and DTE has not indicated a willingness to partner with us to allow for community solar for residents like the Figueroas or like me, whose house is not ideally situated for solar energy generation, to buy into community level solar. And for that reason, I can't support this. I appreciate everybody's effort. I understand that there's no malice involved in any of this, but I just think that it's the wrong solution here. That's all.
Further discussion? Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Apathy.
Councilmember Apathy?
Yes.
Councilmember Banister?
Yes.
Councilmember Westfall?
Yes.
Councilmember Lum?
Yes.
Councilmember Ackerman?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Councilmember Crapo?
Yes.
Councilor Warbachowski?
No.
Councilor Smith?
No.
Motion carries.
B2, an ordinance to amend section 117 of chapter 1, adoption, contents, and interpretation of title 1 of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor, moved by Councilmember Westfall, seconded by Councilmember Ackerman. Discussion, please, of B2. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It's approved. C1, an ordinance to amend section 961, 962, and 968 of chapter 108, disorderly conduct of Title 9 of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor, moved by Councilmember Wapahowski, second by Councilmember Smith. Discussion, please, of C1. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It's approved. C2, an ordinance to amend sections 1069, 1070, 1071, 1072, 1073, and 1075, the Chapter 126, Traffic of Title 10 of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor, moved by Councilmember Lum, second by Councilmember Ackerman. Discussion, please, of C2. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It's approved. DC1, resolution to appoint Rachel Hawkins to the Commission on Disability Issues, moved by Councilor Westfall, seconded by Councilmember Crapo. Discussion, please, of DC1. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved with 10 council members present, all voting in the affirmative, thus satisfying the 7-vote requirement. DC2, resolution recognizing Allen Creek Preschool as a civic nonprofit organization operating in Ann Arbor for the purpose of obtaining a charitable gaming license, moved by Councilmember Smith, seconded by Councilmember Wapahowski. Discussion, please, of DC2. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. DB1, resolution to approve grant application to the USDA Agricultural Conservation Easement Program through the Huron River Regional Conservation Partnership Program for the purpose of purchase of development rights on properties in Northfield Township. Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, seconded by Councilmember Crapple. Discussion, please, of DB1. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. DB2, resolution to approve the purchase of development rights on the Divine Koskela farm property in Scioto Township. Approve a participation agreement with Washtenaw County Parks and Recreation and appropriate funds not to exceed $575,367 from the Open Space and Parkland Preservation millage proceeds. Moved by Councilmember Crapple, seconded by Councilmember Ackerman. Discussion, please, of DB2. Councilmember Lum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have 2 Greenbelt purchases on the agenda tonight, and as you know by now, I don't support those where there's not significant leverage of local tax dollars, but I'm pleased to see that's not the case with these 2. Both are large PDRs, 100 acres and 80 acres, and in each case, there's a substantial federal grant and county funding participation as well. The result is that local Greenbelt tax dollars are funding much less than half the purchase price. Plus, the purchases, especially this first one in Scioto Township, scored highly in the Greenbelt application process. I will be supporting both tonight. And I'd like to thank staff, City Attorney Fales. She's doing a lot of work here on her before she departs. So call out City Attorney Fales for, I know she did a lot of work on these, and for the one we just approved, for their efforts in securing the outside funding. So, thank you.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved with 10 council members present, all voting in the affirmative, thus satisfying the 8-vote requirement. DB3, resolution to approve the purchase of development rights on the Rogers Revocable Trust property in Lodi Township, approve a participation agreement with Washtenaw County Parks and Recreation, and appropriate funds not to exceed $378,367 from the Open Space and Parkland Preservation millage proceeds. Moved by Councilmember Crapple, seconded by Councilmember Westfall. Discussion, please, of DB3. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved with 10 council members present, all voting in the affirmative, thus satisfying the 8-vote requirement. DS1, resolution to approve fiscal year 2018 fee adjustments for parks and recreation services for Argo and Gallup liveries. Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, seconded by Councilmember Lum. Discussion, please, of DS1. Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This represents a very moderate, small, even increase in fees for rentals for single-user and 2-user boats traveling between Argo and Gallup. I want to applaud the Parks Department for really good financial planning. They're one of our few departments that actually creates profit and does tremendous work making sure we all get to enjoy our community to its fullest. This is good planning. Our liveries turn quite a profit to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars each year, and go to subsidize some of those parks programs that aren't profitable, but we all enjoy. While demand is up, I think it's a responsible time to raise rates, but just draw any kind of caution to overdependence of one part of your system as a means to pay for others. I think should economic times turn, God forbid, it'll be important to take another look at some of those activities, things like golf courses without liquor licenses. But for now, I'm very pleased and proud of our Parks Department for the tremendous work they do, especially with financial planning.
Councilmember Lum.
Yeah, I too would like to just thank the Parks and Rec folks. Whenever there's an increase in Parks and Rec fees, and it doesn't happen all that often, we are always provided very helpful backup in terms of other community rate benchmarks, the revenue impacts, and as well as good detail on the types of fees and when they were last increased. Specifically for the livery rentals we're considering here, when you look at other communities, our rates are comparable. Plus, these increases, which will be effective in April, represent the first increases in 3 years. Again, all the data is really helpful in informing the decision, and I just wanted to acknowledge the good work that they do, that this information that they are providing, this backup, is appreciated, and I'll be supporting this tonight.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. DS1, resolution to approve fiscal year 19 fee adjustments for safety service area fire department service fee schedule. Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, seconded by Councilmember Crapple. Discussion, please, of DS2. Councilmember Lum.
Sorry, but I would like to thank them as well. This time to the fire department for working closely with the business community stakeholders on these fire inspection fees. This previously had been rather controversial, and we of course have a letter from the members of the business community indicating their support for this recommendation. They've had several meetings with the stakeholders hashing through the structure of the fees and the rates themselves. And then this note that we received from the business participants indicating their support for the proposal we're considering is very helpful. That's the kind of feedback we need to inform us, and it's nice to see that, and it demonstrates that consensus can be reached when you work at it. The fee proposal based on square footage is logical and reasonable, and I think also that by piloting a self-inspection program for hotels and developing, we've heard from the hotel industry about this, so doing this pilot and then developing incentives that reward good inspection performance also makes sense. So I'd like to thank the folks who were involved in this, and thank the business community reps who worked with the city, and I'm happy to support this tonight as well.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. Do we have communications today from our city attorney?
No, I already made my communication. Thank you.
We have before us the clerk's report of communications, petitions, and referrals. May I have a motion, please, to approve the clerk's report? Moved by Councilmember Smith, seconded by Councilmember Warpachowski. Discussion, please. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. We now come to public comment general time. Public comment general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment general time, one need not have signed up in advance. Speakers will have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Is there anyone who'd like to speak at public comment? Seeing no one, public comment is closed. Are there communications from council? Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Very quickly, Ms. Fischer, welcome to the community. We're glad to have you. Thanks for coming out. I'm sure some of our colleagues who have been on council longer can cite more work we've done to voice protest around gun violence, particularly around our young residents and school children. I just want to let you know, just 2 weeks ago, we voted to step in to draft an amicus brief on behalf or in support of the school district in their court case against an open carry rights group. We live in a state where gun rights seem to be a policy priority for the majority, and it's a difficult place to be for a local community that believes in practical policy and safety. So please know that it's not falling on deaf ears, and we appreciate you coming out.
Further communication from council. Councilmember Smith.
Just want to let anybody watching at home know that I'm hosting my bi-monthly coffee hour this week at 9:30 on Friday morning at Sweetwater's on West Washington.
Further communication. Do we have a closed session today?
Yes, Mayor, under the Open Meeting Act, we have a closed session concerning pending litigation and attorney-client written communication.
May I have a motion, please, to go into closed session, moved by Councilmember Westfall, seconded by Councilmember Ackerman. Discussion? Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Apathy.
Councilmember Apathy?
Yes.
Councilmember Banister?
Yes.
Councilmember Westfall?
Yes.
Councilmember Lum?
Yes.
Councilmember Ackerman?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Councilmember Crapple?
Yes.
Councilmember Warpahowski?
Yes.
Councilor Smith?
Yes.
Motion carries.
We are now in closed session. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? We are back in open session. May I have a motion, please? Do we have people here? Motion, please, to adjourn. Moved by Councilmember Westfall, seconded by Councilmember Crapple. Discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? We are adjourned.